Welcome to the Artificial Fluency podcast. I'm Emily, and today we're diving into the wonderful world of colour idioms. These expressions add so much life and personality to English conversations. By the end of this episode, you'll be using these colourful phrases like a native speaker. Are you ready to brighten up your English? Let's get started. Hello everyone, I'm so excited to have you here today. Have you ever wondered why English speakers say things like "I'm feeling blue" or "she was green with envy"? These expressions might sound strange if you translate them directly, but they're actually idioms, phrases that have meanings beyond their individual words. Today, we're exploring idioms related to colours. These expressions are used every day by native speakers, and understanding them will take your English comprehension to the next level plus. Using these idioms in your own speech will make you sound much more natural and fluent. Let's start with idioms using the colour blue. Blue is often associated with sad or melancholy feelings in English. Here are 3 common blue idioms. First, feeling blue means feeling sad or depressed. For example, Sarah has been feeling blue since her dog got sick. Second, out of the blue means something that happens suddenly or unexpectedly. For example, out of the blue, my old friend called me after 10 years of no contact. Third, once in a blue moon means something that happens very rarely. For example, John only visits his hometown once in a blue moon, maybe every few years. Can you think of situations where you might use these expressions? Maybe you felt blue after a disappointing test result or received good news out of the blue. Now let's move on to red idioms. Red often represents strong emotions like anger, embarrassment, or passion. Here are 3 common red idioms. Seeing red means being very angry. For example, when Tom saw the damage to his new car, he was seeing red. Caught red-handed means to be caught in the act of doing something wrong. For example, the student was caught red-handed while cheating on the exam. Red carpet treatment means to be treated like someone very important or special. For example, the hotel gave us the red carpet treatment with complimentary champagne and an upgraded room. These idioms are so useful in everyday conversations. Can you imagine using them? Maybe you've seen someone caught red-handed taking the last cookie. Or perhaps you've received the red carpet treatment at a restaurant. Green idioms often relate to jealousy, inexperience, or money. Let's explore 3 common green expressions. Green with envy means to be very jealous. For example, Lisa was green with envy when she saw her friend's new smartphone. Green thumb refers to someone who is good at gardening or growing plants. For example, my grandmother has a green thumb. Every plant in her garden thrives. The grass is always greener on the other side means people often think others have better situations than their own. For example, don't quit your job just because your friend's job seems more exciting. Remember, the grass is always greener on the other side. These expressions add so much colour to your conversations. Have you ever been green with envy or wished you had a green thumb? Now, let's hear a short conversation that includes some of these colour idioms. Listen carefully and see if you can identify the idioms. Alex: Hey Jamie, you look like you're feeling blue. What's wrong? Jamie: Well, out of the blue, my boss announced layoffs at work. I'm worried about my position. Alex: That's stressful. But remember how you were green with envy when Karen got that job at the competing company? Maybe this is your chance to apply there too. Jamie: You're right. I tend to think the grass is always greener somewhere else, but maybe this time it actually is. I'll send in my application tonight. Alex: Good idea. And don't worry too much. You only get stressed about work once in a blue moon. So I know this must be serious. Did you catch all the idioms? There were 5. Feeling blue, out of the blue, green with envy, the grass is always greener, and once in a blue moon, great job if you identified them all. Let's continue with expressions using black and white. These colors often represent extremes or contrasts. Here are some common idioms. Black and white thinking means seeing things as absolutely good or bad, with no middle ground. For example, politics isn't black and white, there are many complex perspectives on each issue. Black sheep refers to someone who is different from the rest of their family or group, often in a negative way. For example, Uncle Tim is considered the black sheep of the family because of his unusual lifestyle. White lie is a small, harmless lie told to avoid hurting someone's feelings. For example, when Sarah asked if I liked her haircut, I told a white lie and said it looked great, even though I preferred her previous style. These idioms help express nuanced ideas about how we see the world. Have you ever told a white lie to protect someone's feelings? Now let's look at idioms with yellow and golden. Yellow can represent cowardice, while golden often indicates something valuable or special. Yellow-bellied means cowardly or afraid. For example, don't be yellow-bellied, just ask your boss for that raise. Golden opportunity refers to an excellent chance that might not come again. For example, studying abroad was a golden opportunity for me to improve my language skills. Golden years means the years of retirement when people can relax and enjoy life. For example, my grandparents are enjoying their golden years by traveling and pursuing their hobbies. I especially like the expression golden opportunity. It reminds us to recognize and take advantage of special chances when they rise. Let's practice with a quick activity. I'll describe a situation, and you think about which color idiom fits best. Ready? Situation 1. Your friend suddenly announces they're moving to another country next month. With no previous warning, which idiom fits out of the blue would be perfect here. Situation 2. Your colleague is obviously jealous of your recent promotion. Which idiom works? Green with envy fits this situation. Situation 3. Your neighbor has an amazing garden where everything grows beautifully. Which expression works? Green thumb is exactly right. Situation 4. You told your friend you loved their cooking even though you didn't really enjoy it. Which idiom applies? White lie describes this perfectly. How did you do? If you got most of these right, you're already becoming fluent with color idioms. Here's one more interesting point about color idioms. They can vary across cultures. For example, in English, we say feeling blue for sadness, but in German, they might say to see black Schwarzen for being pessimistic. In Japanese, someone might be described as turning blue Aokunaru when they're afraid, similar to how we might say turning white as a ghost in English. These differences highlight how idioms are deeply connected to cultural perspectives. That's why learning idioms isn't just about memorizing phrases. It's about understanding cultural ways of thinking. Before we wrap up today's episode, here's a fun challenge for the coming week. I want you to use at least 3 color idioms in your English conversations, whether you're chatting with friends, talking to colleagues, or practicing with language partners. Try to include feeling blue, out of the blue, or green with envy in your discussions. Then, share your experience with us. Post about how you used these idioms using #ArtificialFluencyIdioms on social media. Did using these expressions make your English sound more natural? Were people impressed by your colorful language? I can't wait to hear your stories. Have you ever dreamed of visiting another country? What do you imagine when you hear the words United States? Have you ever wondered what surprises you might find there? Think about your answers as I share my own story. Today, I'll tell you about my first visit to the United States and what I saw, learned, and experienced. It was my first time flying across the ocean. I was excited, but also a little nervous. I had read about the United States in books, watched documentaries about its landmarks, and heard people talk about it for years. But this time, I was going to see it with my own eyes. I landed at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. The airport was big and busy, filled with people from all over the world. I had to wait in a long line for passport control, but the officer was polite and asked me a few simple questions. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit my face. It was winter, and snow covered the ground. The first thing I noticed was how fast people walked. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry. I took a taxi to the hotel, and the driver's name was Mr. Raymond. He had a strong New York accent, and he told me some funny stories about passengers he had met over the years. I asked him if he liked his job, and he said, "Well, I meet people from everywhere. That's the best part." That night I went for a walk near Times Square. It was so bright even though it was late. There were big screens showing ads, people taking photos, and others selling food from carts. I tried a hot pretzel for the first time. It was warm, salty, and delicious. The next morning I visited Central Park. It was calm and peaceful, with trees, walking paths, and people jogging. I met an older man named Mr. Thomas, who was feeding the birds. He told me he had lived in New York his whole life. I asked him what he liked most about the city, and he said, "You can find anything you need here, and no matter who you are, there's a place for you." I wrote about that moment in my journal. Listening to Mr. Thomas made me realize how many stories live in every city, waiting to be heard. That's why I love talking to strangers when I travel. After a few days in New York, I went to Washington, D.C. I wanted to see the White House and the famous museums. At the National Mall, I saw a group of students visiting from another state. One of their teachers, Mrs. Carter, noticed I was alone and asked if I wanted to walk with them. She was kind, and we spoke about education in the US and other countries. Her students asked me what it was like to live in my country, and we shared laughs over the differences in food and school uniforms. Later in the trip, I stayed with my friend Daniel and his wife Emily in a small town in Virginia. They were warm and welcoming. Their house had a beautiful garden, and every morning Emily made fresh coffee and homemade biscuits. I helped Daniel with some work on his farm, and in the evenings we sat outside talking about life, work, and family. They taught me simple expressions people use in everyday conversation, like hang in there and no worries. I learned that American people often say, "How's it going?" instead of "How are you?" And they like to keep conversations light and friendly, even with strangers. One day, we went to a local community center where people were volunteering to pack food for families in need. I joined them, and I met a young man named Eric. He said he had been volunteering for years because his parents had taught him to help others. He said, "If we all do a little, the world gets better for everyone." That stayed with me. Being in the United States showed me that it's not just about famous places or big cities. It's about people. People with different stories, different traditions, but the same hope for a good life. It also helped me with my English. I wrote in my journal every night using new words I heard during the day. I listened carefully when people spoke, and I asked questions when I didn't understand something. After my stay in Virginia, I traveled to Chicago. The city felt very different from New York and Washington, D.C. The buildings were tall and modern, but the air felt fresh, and the people seemed more relaxed. I took a walk by Lake Michigan. The water was calm, and many people were jogging or riding bikes along the lakefront path. One afternoon, I visited the famous Willis Tower. It was one of the tallest buildings in the world. When I went to the observation deck on the 103rd floor, I could see the whole city spread out below me. It was an amazing view. I met a woman named Sarah who worked there. She told me she loved helping visitors see the city from above because it made them feel small and connected to something bigger. Sarah explained some history about the city. She said Chicago was known for its strong spirit, especially after a big fire many years ago. The city rebuilt itself quickly and became very proud of its strength and teamwork. Listening to her made me think about how people can come together to solve problems. The next day I tried Chicago's famous deep dish pizza. It was different from pizza I had eaten before, very thick with lots of cheese and tomato sauce. I shared the pizza with my new friend Michael. He was a teacher at a local school. We talked about education and how students in the US learn English in different ways. Michael told me that practicing speaking with friends is one of the best methods. He encouraged me to keep talking and listening as much as possible. During my visit, I also took time to explore small neighborhoods. I noticed that each area had its own style and atmosphere. Some streets had small shops owned by families who had lived there for decades. Others had colorful murals on the walls showing the city's history and culture. Walking through these neighborhoods felt like walking through a living storybook. One evening, Michael invited me to a community meeting where people talked about ways to help their neighborhood. I was surprised to see how involved and friendly everyone was. They shared ideas about cleaning parks, supporting local schools, and organizing events for children. It was clear that people cared a lot about where they lived. Before I left Chicago, I wrote a letter to Michael thanking him for his kindness and help. Writing letters like this helps me practice English and shows appreciation, which is important in any language. Traveling to different cities in the United States taught me more than just vocabulary. It showed me how people live, work, and connect with each other. I hope my story encourages you to listen carefully to English conversations, write down new words, and practice speaking whenever you can. After Chicago, I took a train to Boston. Boston is one of the oldest cities in the United States. When I arrived, I was surprised by how different it felt compared to the cities I had already visited. Boston has many old buildings made of brick and stone. Walking through the city felt like stepping back in time. The streets were narrow, and there were many small parks with benches where people were reading books or chatting quietly. My first stop was the Freedom Trail. It is a path that goes through the city and shows important historical places. I followed the trail and listened to an audio guide on my phone. The guide told stories about the American Revolution and famous people who lived in Boston. It was very interesting because it helped me understand more about the history of the United States. While walking, I met a man named James. James was a tour guide who worked near the Boston Common Park. He noticed I was listening to the audio guide and smiled. We started talking, and I asked him why he liked being a tour guide. He said that he loved sharing stories about the city because every place had a story to tell. James also told me that practicing English by talking to visitors from around the world helped him become confident and speak clearly. I asked James about the weather in Boston. He explained that the city has cold winters and warm summers. He said the seasons change a lot, and people enjoy different activities depending on the time of year. James invited me to join a small group of locals who were practicing English at a nearby library. I was happy to join. The group was very friendly, and we talked about simple topics like food, hobbies, and daily routines. One lady named Anna shared a story about her first day at work in Boston. She said it was hard to understand her coworkers at first, but she kept practicing and asking questions. Anna said, "Don't be afraid to make mistakes. That is how we learn." The next day, I visited Harvard University. It is one of the most famous universities in the world. I walked through the campus and saw students studying outside on the grass. I felt inspired by the quiet and peaceful atmosphere. While sitting on a bench, I met a student named Mark. Mark was from California, but he was studying in Boston for the year. He told me about his studies in computer science and how he liked working on projects with students from different countries. Mark said that learning English well was important for his future career. He practiced by listening to podcasts, reading books, and speaking with friends. I asked him for advice on improving listening skills. Mark recommended watching news in English every day and writing down new words to remember them better. I also tried local food in Boston. I ate clam chowder, a thick soup made with clams, potatoes, and cream. It was very tasty and warm, perfect for the cold weather. I shared a meal with Mark and some of his friends. We talked about differences between cities in the United States and shared stories about our hometowns. This conversation helped me practice speaking and listening at the same time. One afternoon, I took a boat tour around Boston Harbor. The boat captain, Mr. Wilson, explained the history of the harbor and pointed out famous places. He spoke clearly and slowly, which made it easy for me to understand. I found it helpful to listen to clear English, especially when I was learning new words about nature and geography. During my trip, I kept a notebook with me. Every evening I wrote down new words and expressions I heard during the day. I also tried to write short paragraphs about what I did and what I learned. Writing helped me remember the words and practice grammar. Before I left Boston, I visited a small bookstore near the harbor. The owner, Mrs. Green, recommended some easy English books for learners. She told me that reading is one of the best ways to improve vocabulary and understand how sentences are formed. I bought a few books and planned to read them on the plane ride home. This trip to Boston was a great experience. I learned about American history, practiced English with new friends, and discovered how different cities have their own unique character. Most importantly, I realized that speaking and listening every day, even with small conversations, is the key to improving your English. After leaving Boston, I decided to visit a small town in Pennsylvania. The name of the town was Lancaster. It was quiet and peaceful. There were no tall buildings or loud traffic. Instead, I saw green fields, small houses, and families walking together. It felt very different from the big cities I had visited earlier. When I arrived, I stayed at a small guest house owned by a kind couple named Mr. and Mrs. Parker. They welcomed me with warm smiles and showed me my room. It was simple but very clean and comfortable. The window looked out onto a big garden full of flowers. I could see butterflies flying from one plant to another, and I could hear birds singing in the morning. The next day, I went outside to explore the town. I walked slowly down the quiet streets and noticed that people here like to say hello to strangers. An old man named Thomas waved at me and asked where I was from. I told him I was visiting from another country and learning English. He smiled and said, "Well, talking to locals will help you get better quickly." Thomas was a retired farmer. He had lived in Lancaster all his life. He invited me to sit with him on a bench outside the local grocery store. We talked for more than an hour. He told me stories about when he was young, how he used to help his father in the fields, and how things had changed over the years. He spoke slowly and clearly, which made it easier for me to follow along. When I did not understand something, I asked him to explain, and he did it with patience. After the conversation, I wrote down new words I learned from Thomas. Words like harvest, barn, and tractor. I made short sentences with these words to help me remember them better. For example, I wrote, "The farmer keeps hay in the barn." I also practiced saying the sentences out loud. Later that afternoon, I visited a local bakery run by a woman named Emily. She made fresh bread, cookies, and cakes every day. When I walked in, the smell of warm bread made me feel hungry. Emily greeted me and asked if I wanted to try something. I asked her which item was popular in the town. She said the raisin bread was her best seller. I bought one loaf and thanked her. She noticed my accent and asked if I was learning English. I said yes, and she said I could stay for tea if I wanted to practice more. I sat down at a small table and we talked for a long time. Emily told me how she started baking when she was a child with her mother. She talked about how much she enjoyed preparing food for the people in her neighborhood. She also said that talking with visitors like me helped her understand different cultures and ways of thinking. She asked me about my country, my language, and what brought me to the United States. That conversation helped me improve both my listening and speaking skills. I was able to express my thoughts, and I listened carefully to her stories. Emily also gave me a small notebook and said, "Write one sentence every day about what you learn. Even one sentence can make a big difference." I thanked her and promised to follow her advice. The next morning, I joined a local farmer's market. It was set up in the center of town, and people from nearby villages came to sell vegetables, fruits, eggs, and handmade crafts. I walked around, looking at all the colorful booths. At one table, I met a young man named David who was selling jars of honey. I asked him how he made the honey. He told me that he and his wife kept bees on their small farm. He showed me photos of the bee boxes and explained how the bees collected nectar from flowers. David spoke with passion. He loved his work and was happy to explain every step. I learned words like hive, nectar, and beekeeping. I asked him questions, and he answered each one with a smile. At the end of our talk, he said I could visit his farm the next day if I wanted to learn more. I said yes. When I arrived at David's farm, I met his wife, Rachel. She was friendly and welcomed me with warm tea. They showed me the bees from a safe distance and explained how they cared for them. Rachel said that working with nature taught her to be patient and calm. I listened carefully and asked many questions. I wrote down everything later in my notebook. I also wrote a short paragraph about the farm, using the new vocabulary. After the farm visit, I spent time walking through the fields. The air was fresh, and I could hear the wind moving through the tall grass. I sat under a tree and thought about everything I had learned so far. I remembered the people I had met: James in Boston, Michael in Chicago, Emily in Lancaster, and David and Rachel on the farm. All of them helped me practice English in real ways. They told stories, shared advice, and gave me time to speak. Insights. The evening, I returned to the guest house and talked with Mr. and Mrs. Parker again. I told them about my day at the farm and shared what I had learned. They listened and asked me questions. It felt good to have a conversation where I could use what I had just learned. They said I had improved a lot since I arrived. That night, I read one of the books I bought in Boston. I stopped every few pages to write down new words. I looked up their meanings and then tried to use each word in a sentence. For example, I read the word gentle and wrote, "The wind was gentle as I walked through the field." This helped me understand how words work in real situations. During my trip in Pennsylvania, I also started keeping a small journal in English. Every night I wrote about my day, what I did, who I met, what I ate, and what I learned. Writing helped me organize my thoughts and remember useful expressions. It also showed me how much I was learning each day, even from small conversations and simple events. This kind of real-world English practice made me feel more confident. I understood that learning a language is not only about grammar or tests, it is also about meeting people, asking questions, listening carefully, and writing your thoughts. After my time in Pennsylvania, I traveled to New York City. New York is a very big city with many people and tall buildings. The streets were busy with cars, buses, and people walking everywhere. I felt excited but also a little tired from the noise and the crowd. My first stop was Central Park. Central Park is a large green space in the middle of the city. It has trees, lakes, paths for walking, and many places to sit and relax. I walked slowly through the park and saw people jogging, playing with their dogs, and sitting on benches reading books or talking with friends. While I was sitting on a bench near a small pond, I met a man named Robert. Robert was feeding the ducks and told me that he comes to Central Park every day to enjoy the fresh air. We talked about New York and the weather. He said that the city can be very hot in the summer and cold in the winter, but many people love the fast life here. Robert told me that he works as a taxi driver. He said that driving in New York is not easy because the streets are always busy. I asked him if he had any advice for someone visiting the city. He said, "Walk as much as you can. You will see many interesting things on foot that you miss in a car. He also said to listen carefully when people speak English because New York is full of different accents and ways of talking. The next day, I visited the Statue of Liberty. It is a very famous symbol of freedom in the United States. I took a ferry boat to Liberty Island where the statue is located. On the boat, I met a woman named Susan. Susan was from England but lived in New York for 5 years. She told me she learned a lot of English by listening to people on the street and watching how they talked in shops and cafes. Susan said, "In New York, people speak very fast, so it is important to practice listening every day." She suggested that I try to watch the news or listen to podcasts to get used to different voices and speeds. I agreed with her and promised to practice more. After visiting the statue, I walked to Times Square. Times Square is very bright and colorful, with many big screens and lights. It is always busy with tourists and street performers. I took some photos and listened to the sounds around me. There were people speaking many languages, but mostly English. I noticed some street sellers talking loudly to attract customers. Their English was clear, but quick. That evening, I met my friend David for dinner. David lives in New York and works as a graphic designer. We went to a small restaurant where they served food from many countries. I tried a dish called pasta with tomato sauce. It was simple, but delicious. David and I talked about life in New York and differences between big cities and small towns. He said that living in a big city can be exciting but also stressful. He told me that he practices English every day by reading books, watching videos, and talking to people at work. David said, "To improve, you must use English in many ways: reading, writing, listening, and speaking." The next morning, I visited the New York Public Library. It is a very big and old building with many books. I sat in a quiet room and read a short story in English. The story was about a young girl who traveled around the world. I found some new words, so I wrote them down and checked their meanings. Then, I wrote a few sentences using those words to help me remember. After the library, I walked to a nearby cafe. The cafe was small and cozy. I ordered coffee and a sandwich. While waiting, I listened to people around me. They were talking about work, plans for the weekend, and news. I tried to understand as much as I could. A man named John noticed I was listening carefully. He asked if I was learning English. I said yes. John told me he was an English teacher and that he often met students who wanted to improve their skills. He gave me some advice. He said, "Try to speak with people as much as possible. Even if you make mistakes, it is important to keep trying." John also suggested keeping a diary in English and writing about daily activities. That day, I followed John's advice. I wrote about my visit to Central Park, the Statue of Liberty, and the library. Writing helped me remember the new words and practice grammar. I read my sentences out loud to practice pronunciation. Later, I visited a small museum about American history. The museum had many interesting objects and stories. I read the descriptions in English and listened to an audio guide. The guide spoke clearly and explained the history in simple words. I learned about important events and people who helped shape the country. In the museum, I met a young woman named Emma. Emma was a student studying history. She said she came from Canada and was visiting New York for a few days. We talked about our favorite books and history topics. Emma said she improved her English by reading newspapers and talking with friends in English. She told me to be patient, because learning a language takes time. During my trip to New York, I also tried to listen to radio programs in English. Some programs were news, and others were interviews or discussions. I noticed that listening to different types of English helped me understand more words and phrases. Every night I wrote about my day and new things I learned. Sometimes I wrote simple sentences like, "I walked in Central Park." Other times, I wrote longer sentences. "I met a man named Robert who drives a taxi in New York City." Writing every day helped me remember the language better. This trip showed me that every place has its own story. Meeting people, listening carefully, and practicing writing are important for learning English. It is okay to make mistakes. What matters is to keep practicing and never give up. Now think about this. Where would you like to visit if you could travel? How would you practice English in a new city? What stories can you tell about your own experiences? Try to answer these questions out loud or write them down. Speaking and writing about your thoughts will help you improve. Listening to real stories, like mine, can help you learn English naturally and easily. After spending several days in New York City, I decided to travel to Washington, D.C. Washington is the capital of the United States. It is smaller than New York, but very important because it is where the government works. I wanted to see the famous buildings and learn more about American history. When I arrived, I stayed at a small hotel near the National Mall. The National Mall is a big park where many important monuments and museums are located. I walked there early in the morning because it was quiet and peaceful. The first place I visited was the Lincoln Memorial. The memorial is a large building with a big statue of Abraham Lincoln sitting in a chair. Lincoln was an important president who helped keep the country together during a difficult time. I read the words on the walls, which were part of his famous speeches. The words were inspiring and made me think about courage and freedom. While I was at the memorial, I met a man named Michael. Michael was a tour guide who showed visitors around the city. He spoke slowly and clearly, so I could understand him well. Michael told me many interesting facts about the monuments. He said that practicing listening in real places helps people learn faster. Michael invited me to join a small group of tourists who were visiting the city. I agreed because it was a good chance to practice English. The group was from different countries and everyone was trying to learn English. The guide spoke carefully, and after each explanation he asked if we had any questions. This made the visit very helpful and easy to follow. Next, we went to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. This museum has many airplanes and spacecraft. I saw the first airplane made by the Wright brothers and the Apollo 11 command module that went to the moon. The museum had signs in simple English and there was an audio guide too. Listening to the guide helped me understand the history of flight and space travel. One of the tourists in the group was a woman named Sarah. She was from Australia and had been studying English for 2 years. Sarah said she liked visiting museums because it gave her a chance to hear and read English about real topics. She also said that talking with other tourists helped her speak better. After the museum, we walked to the Washington Monument. The monument is a very tall white tower that you can see from many places in the city. I learned that the monument honors George Washington, the first president of the United States. While waiting in line to go inside, I practiced listening to people talking in English. Some were families, some were students. Everyone spoke differently, and I tried to understand as much as I could. In the afternoon, I met my cousin Daniel. Daniel lives in Washington and works as an engineer. We had lunch at a small restaurant nearby. The restaurant served sandwiches, soups, and salads. Daniel ordered a chicken sandwich, and I tried tomato soup with bread. The food was simple but tasty. During lunch, Daniel and I talked about life in Washington. He told me that many people here work in offices or government jobs. Daniel said that living in the capital means being near many important places and events. He told me that he reads the news every day to improve his English and to stay informed. Daniel also suggested that I try listening to radio programs from Washington. He said that hearing local news and stories can help me understand the language better. I agreed and decided to try this after dinner. Later that day, I visited the Library of Congress. This library is very big and has millions of books. I found a quiet place to sit and read a book about American presidents. The book was written in simple English, and it helped me learn new words. Reading books like this is a good way to improve vocabulary. In the evening, I turned on the radio to listen to a news program from Washington. The news was about the weather and local events. The speaker spoke clearly, and I tried to write down new words I heard. I paused the radio sometimes to repeat difficult words and practice pronunciation. This helped me get used to the sounds of English. The next morning, I woke up early to visit the United States Capitol building. This building is where the government meets to make laws. I took a tour and saw the large rooms where politicians work. The guide spoke English but used some difficult words. I tried my best to listen and understand. After the tour, I wrote notes about the visit. Writing helps me remember new words and facts. I wrote sentences like, "The Capitol is a big white building," and "People make laws to help the country." Writing these sentences was good practice for both English and memory. In the afternoon, I visited the National Gallery of Art. This museum has many paintings and sculptures. I looked at paintings by famous artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Vincent van Gogh. The museum had short descriptions in English next to each painting. Reading and listening to these helped me improve my vocabulary. At the gallery, I met a student named Emily. Emily was studying art history and spoke English very well. She told me that visiting museums is a great way to learn English because you see interesting things and read about them at the same time. Emily said that using a notebook to write new words is very helpful. That evening, I practiced writing again. I wrote a paragraph about the places I visited in Washington. I wrote, "I saw the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the United Capitol. I learned many new words about history." Writing like this every day helped me get better at spelling and grammar. During the week in Washington, I also practiced speaking with people in shops and cafes. I asked questions like, "Can you help me find this book?" or "How much does this cost?" These simple conversations helped me build confidence. One day, I went to a local market. The market was full of fresh fruits, vegetables, and handmade goods. I spoke with a vendor named Lisa. Lisa was friendly and spoke slowly. We talked about the food and the weather. I practiced listening and answering her questions. Before I left Washington, I reflected on all the things I learned. Traveling and visiting different places gave me many chances to hear English in real life. Listening to different voices and writing about my experiences helped me improve a lot. Now I want you to think about your own city or town. What places do you like to visit? How can you practice English there? Can you talk to people or read signs and books? Try to listen carefully to the sounds and words around you. Practicing every day will help you get better. After leaving Washington, D.C., I took a train to Philadelphia. Philadelphia is one of the oldest cities in the United States. It is famous for its history and important events in the country's past. I wanted to see where the Declaration of Independence was signed and learn more about American freedom. When I arrived, I stayed at a small guest house near the city center. The guest house was quiet and comfortable. I met the owner, Mr. Johnson. He was very kind and gave me a map of the city. He also told me some good places to visit. Mr. Johnson spoke slowly so I could understand his English well. The next morning, I went to Independence Hall. This is the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. The building is old and has red bricks. Inside, there are rooms with wooden chairs and tables. I imagined the important meetings that happened there many years ago. While I was in the hall, I listened to a guide named David. David explained the history in simple English. He said that this place is very important for freedom and democracy. I took notes because I wanted to remember new words like independence, freedom, and democracy. After the tour, I walked to the Liberty Bell. The Liberty Bell is a symbol of freedom in America. It is a big bell with a crack. People come from all over the world to see it. I read the signs near the bell. The signs told a story about how the bell was used to call people to important meetings. At the Liberty Bell, I met a teacher named Laura. Laura was visiting with her students. She told me that teaching history with stories helps students learn better. She also said that listening to stories in English is a good way to practice the language. Later, I went to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The museum has many paintings and sculptures. Outside the museum, there are big steps. These steps are famous because of a movie where a runner runs up them. I climbed the steps slowly because they were very high. From the top, I saw the whole city. Inside the museum, I listened to an audio guide. The guide talked about different artists and their work. The English was not too difficult. I stopped the guide sometimes to repeat words and try to say them myself. This helped my speaking and listening at the same time. In the evening, I met my friend Tom for dinner. Tom lives in Philadelphia and works as a nurse. We ate at a small diner. I ordered a cheeseburger and fries. Tom ordered a salad. We talked about our day and the places I had visited. Tom told me that practicing English with friends is very helpful. He said that speaking every day builds confidence. We also talked about the differences between Philadelphia and my hometown. Talking about daily life helps improve vocabulary and fluency. The next day, I visited the Franklin Institute, a science museum named after Benjamin Franklin. The museum had many interesting exhibits about electricity, space, and the human body. I read the simple English signs and listened to explanations from the staff. At the museum, I met a student named Olivia. Olivia was studying biology and loved science. She told me she practiced English by reading books and listening to science podcasts. Olivia suggested I find podcasts or videos about topics I like. This makes learning English more enjoyable. After the museum, I took a bus to a nearby park called Fairmount Park. The park was large and green, with many trees and walking paths. I saw people jogging, walking dogs, and having picnics. I sat on a bench and listened to conversations around me. This was a good way to practice listening to natural English. In the park, I wrote a short diary about my visit. Writing every day helps me remember new words and improves my grammar. I wrote sentences like, "I saw the Liberty Bell today," and "the museum was very interesting." Writing simple sentences is good practice for all learners. During the week, I also practiced asking questions in shops and cafes. I asked for directions and prices. This helped me use English in real situations. The people were friendly and helped me understand. Small conversations like these make learning English. One afternoon, I visited a local library. The library had many books and computers. I borrowed a book about American history written in easy English. Reading books that match your level is important. It helps build vocabulary without feeling frustrated. At the library, I met a librarian named Helen. Helen showed me how to use the library's website and find audiobooks. Audiobooks are good for listening practice because you can hear correct pronunciation and intonation. Each day in Philadelphia, I made sure to listen to the local radio. The radio programs talked about news, weather, and community events. Listening to real English spoken by native speakers helps improve understanding of different accents and speeds. Before I left Philadelphia, I spent a day exploring the city on foot. Walking helped me see small details and practice English by reading signs and menus. I spoke with a street vendor named Jack. Jack sold hot dogs and pretzels. We talked about the weather and favorite foods. Talking with Jack was helpful because he used simple words and spoke clearly. I asked questions like, "How long have you worked here?" and "What is your favorite food?" Asking questions helps keep a conversation going and improves speaking skills. Reflecting on my trip to Philadelphia, I realized that visiting new places is a great way to learn English. Seeing historical sites, talking with locals, and reading signs all help improve listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills. Now I want you to think about a place you would like to visit. It could be your city or a new city. Imagine what you would see, hear, and do there. How would you practice English in that place? Can you ask questions? Can you listen carefully to people? Can you write about your experiences? Try to use every chance to practice English. Listen to stories, talk to people, read signs and books, and write about what you learn. These activities will help you improve step by step. After my visit to Philadelphia, I traveled to New York City. New York is one of the biggest and busiest cities in the United States. It is famous for many things like tall buildings, parks, museums, and different cultures. I wanted to see the city with my own eyes and learn about life there. When I arrived in New York, I stayed with my friend Michael. Michael lives in Brooklyn with his wife Sarah. They welcomed me warmly. Michael is a teacher and Sarah works in a hospital. They both spoke clearly and patiently, which helped me understand better. The next morning, Michael took me to Central Park. Central Park is a very large park in the middle of the city. Many people come there to walk, run, ride bikes, and relax. We walked slowly and talked about the park. Michael told me that Central Park is important because it gives people a place to enjoy nature in the busy city. While we were walking, I listened carefully to Michael's English. He used simple words and explained things well. I asked questions like, how many people visit the park every day? And what kind of trees grow here? Asking questions helps me practice speaking and learn new words. Later, we visited the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This museum has thousands of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts from all over the world. I listened to an audio guide in English. The guide spoke slowly and used easy language. I stopped the guide often to repeat sentences and remember new words. At the museum, I met a woman named Emma. Emma is an art student who was visiting from Canada. We talked about our favorite artists and shared tips on learning English. Emma said she practices by reading art books and watching videos with subtitles. This helps her understand difficult words and improve her listening skills. After the museum, Michael and I took a subway to Times Square. Times Square is a very busy and bright place with many big screens and lights. It is full of people from all over the world. I listened to the different languages and accents around me. This helped me get used to understanding English spoken in different ways. In Times Square, I bought a hot dog from a street vendor named John. John was friendly and spoke clearly. I asked him how long he had worked there. He told me he enjoys meeting new people every day. Talking with John helped me practice my English in a real situation. That evening, Sarah cooked dinner for us at home. We ate pasta and salad. Sarah told me stories about New York life. She explained some American customs and holidays. Listening to her helped me learn new phrases and expressions. The next day, Michael and I visited the Statue of Liberty. The statue is a symbol of freedom and hope. We took a ferry to Liberty Island. On the ferry, I listened to a guide explaining the history of the statue. The guide's English was clear and easy to understand. I tried to write down important information while listening. On Liberty Island, I met a tourist named David from Sains, England. David and I talked about traveling and learning English. David said he listens to English podcasts every day. He also watches videos about different countries. I realized that listening to interesting topics makes learning English easier. After the Statue of Liberty, we walked through Wall Street. Wall Street is the financial center of the city. There are many tall buildings and busy people. I saw the New York Stock Exchange and learned about its role in the economy. Michael explained some business words to me, which was helpful. Later, in the week, I visited a public library in Manhattan. The library was big and quiet. I borrowed books about American history and culture. Reading books in English is good for learning new words and understanding grammar. The librarian, Mrs. Clark, helped me find books that were easy to read. At the library, I also listened to English lessons on the computer. The lessons had videos and exercises. I practiced listening carefully and repeating sentences. This kind of practice helps improve both listening and speaking skills. During my stay in New York, I made sure to practice English every day. I listened to the news on the radio and watched videos with subtitles. I spoke with people in shops, cafes, and on the streets. These small conversations helped me build confidence. One afternoon, I visited a small cafe near Michael's home. The cafe was cozy and quiet. I ordered coffee and cake. The barista Lisa was friendly and asked me where I was from. We talked about my trip and the English words I was learning. Lisa said that practicing English in daily life is very important. Walking around the city, I noticed many signs and advertisements in English. I tried to read them carefully and understand their meaning. Reading signs helps with vocabulary and understanding how words are used in real life. In New York, I also learned about public transportation. Using buses and subways helped me practice asking for directions and buying tickets. People at the stations were helpful and patient. I learned useful phrases like, "Which train goes to Central Park?" and "How much is the ticket?" At night, Michael and Sarah and I talked about my plans for the next day. We practiced making sentences and asking questions. Talking with friends is one of the best ways to improve English because it makes learning fun and natural. As I explored New York City, I realized how important it is to use English every day. Listening to real people, asking questions, reading signs, and writing notes all help improve language skills. Learning English is a process that takes time and practice. Now I want you to think about your own city, or a city you want to visit. What kind of places would you like to see? Who would you like to talk to? How would you practice English while you are there? Try to use simple sentences and ask questions when you speak. Listen carefully to the words people use. Write down new words and practice them later. These small steps will help you get better every day. Do you like stories about traveling and meeting new people? Would you like me to tell you more stories that help with learning English? Remember, the best way to improve is to listen, speak, read, and write as much as you can. Keep practicing and do not be afraid to make mistakes. Every mistake is a chance to learn something new. I look forward to sharing more stories with you in the next episodes. After spending several days in New York City, I traveled to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. It is a city full of history, important buildings, and monuments. I wanted to learn more about American history and government while practicing my English. When I arrived in Washington, D.C., I stayed with my friend Robert and his wife, Emily. Robert works as a government employee and Emily is a school teacher. They were very kind and helped me with my English whenever I had questions. Talking to Robert and Emily was very useful because they explained difficult words in simple language. The first place I visited in Washington was the National Mall, the National Mall is a large open park in the city center. It has many famous monuments and museums. I walked slowly and looked at each monument carefully. I tried to listen to the sounds around me and read all the signs in English. One of the most impressive monuments I saw was the Lincoln Memorial. This monument honors Abraham Lincoln, one of the most important presidents in American history. I listened to an audio guide that told the story of Lincoln's life and his work to end slavery. The guide spoke slowly and clearly so I could understand most of it. At the Lincoln Memorial, I met a tourist named Daniel from Australia. Daniel and I talked about our favorite places in Washington, D.C. He said he practiced English by reading newspapers and watching English news channels. I thought this was a good idea and decided to try it too. The next day, Robert took me to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. This museum has many airplanes, rockets, and space exhibits. I listened carefully to the descriptions of the exhibits. Some words were new to me, so I wrote them down in my notebook. Writing new words helps me remember them better. At the museum, I met a young woman named Anna. Anna is a university student studying science. We talked about the exhibits and shared tips on learning English. Anna said she likes to watch English documentaries and listen to podcasts. She told me that watching videos with subtitles helps her understand difficult words. After the museum, I visited the United States Capitol building. This building is where the government makes laws. I took a guided tour and listened to the guide's explanations. The guide used simple language and spoke slowly. I asked questions about the building's history and the government's work. Asking questions helped me practice speaking English. In the evening, Emily prepared a traditional American dinner for us. We ate roast chicken with vegetables and mashed potatoes. During dinner, we talked about American customs and holidays. Emily explained why Thanksgiving is important in the United States. Listening to her stories helped me learn new vocabulary and common expressions. The next morning, I visited the Library of Congress. The library is very big and has millions of books. I borrowed some easy English books about American history and culture. Reading books in English is a good way to improve vocabulary and grammar. The librarian, Mrs. Wilson, helped me find books that were interesting and easy to read. At the library, I also used computers to listen to English lessons. The lessons included videos, quizzes, and pronunciation exercises. I practiced listening carefully and repeating sentences. Practicing this way helps improve both listening and speaking skills. During my time in Washington, D.C., I made sure to practice English every day. I listened to English radio programs and watched videos with subtitles. I spoke with people in cafes, shops, and museums. These small conversations helped me become more confident. One afternoon, I visited a small coffee shop near Robert's house. The coffee shop was quiet and comfortable. I ordered coffee and a sandwich. The barista, Mark, was friendly and asked me about my trip. We talked about my English learning goals. Talking with Mark helped me practice English in a natural situation. While walking in the city, I noticed many signs and advertisements in English. I tried to read them carefully and understand their meaning. Reading signs helps improve vocabulary and shows how words are used in daily life. I also learned about public transportation in Washington, D.C. I used buses and the metro system to get around. Using public transportation helped me practice asking for directions and buying tickets. People at the stations were helpful and patient. I learned useful phrases like, "Which bus goes to the White House?" and "How much is a metro card?" At night, Robert, Emily, and I talked about my plans for the next day. We practiced making sentences and asking questions. Talking with friends is one of the best ways to improve English because it makes learning fun and natural. As I explored Washington, D.C., I realized how important it is to use English every day. Listening to real people, asking questions, reading signs, and writing notes all help improve language skills. Learning English is a process that requires time and practice. Now, I want you to think about your own city or a city you want to visit. What places would you like to see? Who would you like to talk to? How would you practice English while you are there? Try to use simple sentences and ask questions when you speak. Listen carefully to the words people use. Write down new words and practice them later. These small steps will help you get better every day. Do you like stories about traveling and meeting new people? Would you like me to tell you more stories that help with learning English? Remember, the best way to improve is to listen, speak, read, and write as much as you can. After spending several days in Washington, D.C., I traveled to Boston. Boston is one of the oldest cities in the United States. It is famous for its important role in American history. I was excited to visit Boston because I love history and wanted to see the places where many important events happened. When I arrived in Boston, I met my friend David and his wife Sarah. David is a history teacher and Sarah works at a local museum. They invited me to stay at their home. David and Sarah were very welcoming. They helped me practice my English by having long conversations about Boston's history and culture. The first place we visited was the Freedom Trail. The Freedom Trail is a special path in Boston that takes you to 16 important historical sites. David explained the history of each site as we walked. I listened carefully and tried to understand every word. Walking and listening at the same time was a good exercise for my English listening skills. One of the places on the Freedom Trail was the Paul Revere House. Paul Revere was an important figure in the American Revolution. At the house, I listened to a guide who told the story of Paul Revere's famous ride to warn people that the British Army was coming. The guide spoke slowly and clearly, which helped me understand better. After the tour, Sarah took me to a local cafe. The cafe was small but cozy. We ordered coffee and a traditional Boston cream pie. While we ate, Sarah told me about the different neighborhoods in Boston. She used simple English words and explained difficult ones. This made it easier for me to follow the conversation. The next day, David and I visited the Boston Public Library. The library is very big and has many books and resources for people who want to learn. David showed me the section where they have books for English learners. I borrowed a few books and started reading them. Reading helps me improve my vocabulary and grammar. At the library, I also attended a free English conversation group. People from many countries came to practice speaking English. We talked about daily life, hobbies, and travel. Speaking with different people helped me become more confident. I learned how to ask and answer questions in English. One afternoon, I took the subway to visit Harvard University. Harvard is one of the most famous universities in the world. I walked around the campus and looked at the old buildings. I listened to a recorded tour on my phone. The tour guide explained the history of Harvard and its importance in education. While walking on campus, I met a student named Michael. Michael was from England and studying literature. We talked about books and English learning. Michael suggested reading novels and writing short summaries to improve writing skills. I liked this idea and decided to try it. In the evening, Sarah cooked dinner for us. We ate pasta with vegetables and talked about American holidays. Sarah told me about the 4th of July, which is Independence Day in the United States. She explained the traditions and celebrations. Listening to her stories helped me understand American culture better. The following day, I visited the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. The museum has many paintings and sculptures from different countries. I used an audio guide that explained each exhibit. The guide spoke slowly and used simple sentences. This made it easier for me to follow and learn new words. At the museum, I met a woman named Laura. Laura is a teacher who helps immigrants learn English.